Well, our first book today is breathtaking. It's a true story, and although Let Me Go by Helga Schneider may start with the mundane, the author visiting her elderly mother in a nursing home, we soon discover the mother has a much darker past. And here to tell us what they thought of it are the author and comedian Tony Hawks and Esther Ransom. We'll get a description of the story in a moment, but Esther, just a first thought from you on the impact of the book.
Well, obviously it's extremely powerful, and although I've read quite a number of books on this subject, it had a very new angle and new insights for me.
Tony, did you enjoy it?
I did enjoy it. I mean, enjoy is a difficult word with this book because it's quite disturbing in a way, and it makes you think. I mean, it's made me think about a lot of things, and I suppose in a way I do enjoy having that happen to me, and so that I did enjoy it, yes.
Well, let's get some background on the book now.
The story is about the meeting of a woman with her mother. They haven't seen each other for 27 years. They are estranged, they're separated. And the reason is that the mother had been a Nazi during the Second World War, and she had devoted herself to serving Hitler in the worst possible way. She had joined the SS, and she was a guard at a series of concentration camps and at Auschwitz, the notorious death camp. And according to Helga, her mother was involved in the most terrible experiments upon prisoners in Ravensbrück and in Auschwitz, and that she was part of the mass murder of the Jews, the so-called final solution. And the story is about what happens when they meet one day in an old people's home in Vienna. Well, my daughter, like it or not, I have never regretted being a member of the Waffen-SS. Is that clear? Oh, that's clear, Mother. I never doubted it for a moment. And you should know this too, she goes on proudly, that I was the one who put myself forward to be assigned to one of those camps. And do you want to know why? Because I believed in it. One theme through the book, a question that Helga asks constantly when she's with her mother, when she's questioning her, is how could you do it? Did you feel no pity for the Jewish men, women and children who were being murdered? And Helga's mother says no, she felt no compassion, she felt no pity because she was taught to be hard, because these were enemies of the German people. I believed in Germany's mission to free Europe from that repugnant race. Get up, go, that should be my reply. And instead I ask once again, as I did before, didn't you even feel sorry for mothers with newborn babies at their breasts when they went into the gas chambers? Didn't you even feel sorry for the children? The Nazi regime offered a kind of emancipation for German women. Many of them benefited from the Nazi takeover. Helga lives a very good life in Berlin herself, and until the war turns against Germany, for her, Third Reich, as for many Germans, is a good time. Helga Schneider represents a generation of Germans that has committed itself to peace, democracy, fighting anti-Semitism, fighting racism. She is struggling to emancipate herself from everything that her mother represented, from everything that Nazi Germany represented. And I think that Helga Schneider is driven to write this book not only to exercise her own ghosts, but also to issue a warning, to tell young people today that what happened then could happen again in the future.
David Cesarani there on Let Me Go. Esther Ransom, the mother dominates this book, doesn't she?
Yes, and I don't really agree with that assessment of the book, the one we've just heard, because that is a rather male assessment, if you'll pardon me being sexist about this. Forgive me, Tony.
No.
But that's all about issues, and I don't think the book is about issues at all. I think it's about this relationship. I mean, the mum has actually been...
I agree.
Oh, well, there we are. Perhaps I'm not being sexist after all. But this is a bad mother. On all levels, a bad mother. She deserted her children for Hitler. And then she does these terrible things. And I think what the daughter is saying is, in this book, and I think she's a very powerful character, are you still my mother? Are we still linked with an emotional bond at all? Because now you are old and frail. And for me, the thing about this book that moved me, my mother was old and frail. She died recently at the age of 93. And what I remember of my mother is I visited her every week. There wasn't that period of abandonment. But even so, every time I left her, she would say, "Don't leave me." And the extraordinary thing about this mother, who has abandoned her daughter, is that she says exactly the same thing. She says over and over again, "Don't leave me."
And do you find, Tony, yourself thinking this is very, very tough for the daughter? Because when the mother says, "Don't leave me," you're not sure how she should react.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, the mother is torturing the daughter and manipulating her, and it's established that the mother is very manipulative. But I agree with Esther. It is about a mother-daughter relationship, but it's the most extreme that you could imagine. I mean, there are people do get estranged from their parents, and they have over little arguments. But this is about the fact that this mother will not condemn the fact that she pushed people onto burning embers while they were still alive. I mean, and has no regrets about it.
As if when she came in, the first time she sees her mum, and it's 30 years, so she doesn't know what she looks like. And she says, rather than recognizing her, I feel that it's my mother. Italics, feel that woman is my mother, because the bond is primal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for me, there's another moment in this book. I'm Jewish, so when I was in my teens, I read a great deal of Holocaust literature because I wanted to know what happened. What I began to hear had happened was so incredibly terrible that I wanted to read a lot of first-person stuff, and I did. Not, of course, from this generation, from the generation of survivors. And for me, the climax of those books was Schindler's Ark, or Schindler's List, as it became when it was a film. Now, do you remember the little girl in red? Do you remember the little girl with the red coat? Okay. Well, there's a moment like that in this book. The mum, you heard, the mum had plundered all this jewellery. And she tried to give it to her daughter. Do you remember? And then the daughter picks up, at that moment, with icy clarity, an image superimposed itself over the sight of you picking up all your gold. The image of you driving the little girl who had owned this necklace into the gas chamber. At that moment, everything was decided. I was sure of one thing. I didn't want this mother. And to me, I never thought that I would come across another image as startling as the red coat, but the gold necklace that belonged to the little girl that died in Auschwitz is just as powerful.
But here's the question. I wonder if you start to think, is the daughter treating her mother the right way? It's almost, the daughter's almost cruel to her.
But I don't think so. I think what makes you sympathise with the author in this book is that you kind of find yourself thinking, well, what would I have done in this situation? How do you get out of this? I think her initial impulse to go and see her is a loving one. She thinks her mother's going to die. She'll give her one last chance to maybe make peace. But then when she gets there and this meeting starts to happen, she sees that the mother doesn't want to show any remorse. I mean, it's a fascinating study of denial, of guilt, of what love is, whether it's conditional or unconditional, and the mother is just locked into denial. For the mother to contemplate saying what I did was wrong would be almost impossible for her to visit, because she'd spent so much of her life reinforcing it and trying to tell herself that what she did was right.
When they did some of the Auschwitz programs 60 years on, there were ex-Nazis who popped up and tried to justify it all, and you realise they're still knocking around.
Absolutely, and of course it's become hugely popular. Anything to do with Auschwitz, the Holocaust, becomes incredibly fascinating to this generation. I mean, the Auschwitz programs on BBC Two got the most immense audiences, and the other thing that has happened to the best-selling book lists is that they are dominated with people describing terrible cruelty they suffered as children. And I just wonder what we are doing. Are we ourselves exorcising some streak of cruelty in all of us, that we read about other people's experiences of pain as a way what? Of not feeling compassion or of feeling compassion? I worry about us. I worry about us as moviegoers and as book readers. Why were you fascinated?
It's moved me, and it made me think about a lot of things. I mean, the thing that comes across the most is that it's about the dehumanizing effect of war. It also covers the terrible suffering of the Germans that were left behind in Berlin when the Russians came in, and the Russians raped and pillaged, and the suffering of the German people was there. It's incredibly honest. She talks about how she herself, when she was a teenager, was involved in a gang that kicked Jewish people, and she found herself doing it. So it's quite interesting to read something from the point of view of the people that actually did it.
And yet, you know, it's amazing, this mother-daughter thing, isn't it? How powerful it is that for all that you say, the daughter shouldn't even be there, and yet the mother is working all the levers. And there's one bit where she says, the mother says, "If I tell you other things, will you stay?" She stares at me with pleading in her eyes.
The don't leave me.
You know, there's a trade-off. You know, if you will call me mutti or mother, I will tell you certain things that you want to hear. So there's this blackmail going on.
Roberta Derbyshire from Lambeth, what did you make of it?
I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is that she deals almost as much with her own childhood grievances in the past and continuing in the present as with the Jewish situation, and she treats them with the same melodrama. It seems to be so shot through with that. I mean, she complains about almost everything, including not being able to get the coffee she likes. I mean, she's a very complaining woman.
I didn't feel that. I felt that this was an uprooted woman, a woman who didn't have a nurturing background anywhere. I mean, the effect of the Second World War on her was to turn her into more or less an orphan, an abused child. In some ways, this mother figure that she was coming to very late could have resolved all those questions if only she hadn't been a monster.
To underline Roberta's point, she gets very upset when her mother calls her fat and old.
Well, one would, wouldn't one?
Show me the woman that wouldn't.
Exactly. If one's mother's calling one fat and old, who the hell thinks one's thin and young?
The subtext for me is that clearly this is a woman who's been obsessed with this for most of her life, because this was her mother. She knew that her mother did these things. She obviously went and researched it and went, how could she possibly do it? What did she do? One of the main thrusts of her meeting with the mother is to try and find out the truth.
Well, I think the unique thing about the book is that you just don't hear this point of view, do you? Because although, as I say, I have read quite a lot of this literature, it's always from the survivor's point of view and from the Jewish standpoint. You don't hear them explaining, as this mum explains, although I do think I got a glimpse of it in Schindler's List, that basically what you have to do is dehumanize your victims. The Jews are not people, they're vermin. She says, I found them repulsive, and I killed children, Jewish children, so that they wouldn't turn into those disgusting Jewish adults.
Let's hear from Pamela in Newbury. You've read it.
Yeah, I thought it was particularly intriguing that she actually only was sentenced to 6 years in jail after she'd committed these atrocities. And in sort of the environment that we're in now, where genocide's happening, you know, and this woman lived for over 80 years. It's amazing, really.
She wasn't punished, Tony.
Well, I think that's what's interesting about this book is the fact that you start discovering all these sides of things, all these little details that you wouldn't necessarily have known. And certainly, as Esther was saying earlier, that this idea that all we ever tend to read about is what happened for the victims. So I found it just another fascinating element of the book.
And it was a page turner for you.
For me, it was. Yeah.
Esther, for you?
Well, yes, it was, though obviously painful in the content, fascinating in this relationship between mother and daughter. And my heart went out to the daughter, because how do you reconcile the mother from whose, if you'll pardon me being anatomical, womb you sprung, with the monster who did this terrible thing to so many others?
Esther Ransom, Tony Hawkes, thank you both very much indeed.